All right, moving right along, talking about Congress. And when you talk about Congress, we already talked about how you get elected in the Senate for every 6 years. You got the House every 2 years. And there's this thing about running for election, and it's about being the incumbent. I'll talk about the definition of that in a second, but right now, 2.5 incumbency advantage. There are advantages to being an incumbent. And that just means the person who holds office. It's typically a big advantage to be the person who is running for reelection rather than being the challenger, the person who's fighting to get into office. Okay, let's look at this backside. At the top, and you can underline this or put it in real bold kind of writing. You're going to put an incumbent is a person currently holding office. A person currently holding office. So in 2012, President Obama is the incumbent. He's running against Mitt Romney, the challenger. In 2020, President Trump is the incumbent, and he's running against the challenger, Joe Biden. So that's what we mean by incumbent. And what advantages do they have? Well, one, they have name recognition. Name recognition. It's such a huge advantage. So if you have people who vote, they span the spectrum. You have people who are really into politics and they know the names, but the reality is that a lot of people in America, they don't pay that close attention to politics. And if they do, if they do pay attention, they pay attention close to the election. So just having a name that's out there and everybody is familiar with it generally is a good thing. And especially as you get into lower offices, your member of Congress, a senator, or even state and local officials, name recognition might be everything. Like you've just never heard of the person who's running against the incumbent, so you don't vote for them. Fundraising advantage. By having a name, that means that you get more money. And interest groups who are out there trying to influence policy, they're more likely to give you money because you're in office, and they can kind of butter you up by giving you money. Whereas the challenger, they don't know. They're not really sure about you. They're not sure what you're going to do. So fundraising is huge. But by the way, by being in office for a while, you also know people. Knowing people leads to more fundraising. Travel perks. Congressional members can travel back home to their district, and it's all paid for by the taxpayers. So you get some travel perks there. And oftentimes they can travel to a location and justify it as constituent outreach. Like I'm just visiting people in my districts, but actually there's a campaign event after that, or a fundraising event after, and they can kind of write that off. District offices. So especially if you're a member of Congress, you have the right to have a district office, and it'd be paid for by the taxpayers. And this is for, again, constituent services, constituents being people who live in your district. And so you can have these offices open, and you're interacting or having members in your office interacting with people in your community, and you're solving problems for them. Maybe someone has a problem with the Veterans Association, or they need to get a passport or something, and you help them with that. And then the last thing on this list, which is something you probably never heard of, is something called the franking privilege. And I don't know that this is really a big a thing now, in now that we're into social media and whatnot. But the franking privilege used to be a really big deal, which is that means that Congress members get free mail. Basically, they can send out mailers to everybody in their district, and they are free. I used to remember getting a lot of these sort of things. Now, not so much. Now, you're more likely to get an email, or you have social media messages or something like that. It's not as likely that it's free mail. All right, so those are the historic advantages of being an incumbent. Remember, an incumbent is the person who's running for re-election. They already hold office. All right, second thing in this list. All right, this is going to be kind of weird because I'm using a mnemonic. A mnemonic is a memory device. We all know from research that mnemonics actually help people remember things, and this is a really bad one. I've told you before that sometimes bad mnemonics actually work the best. Let's hope that's true here. And so we're talking about the functions of Congress. That's the lesson. The lesson is, what are the functions of Congress? Like, what are they supposed to do, a member in Congress? And so I realized when I looked at the 5 functions of Congress that they spelt a name. And I came up with this name, Lori C. Now, I actually went to Google, and I Googled the name Lori C. And all of the faces that you see here evidently are named Lori C. I don't know who they are. It's just they were named Lori C, and their face popped up. So anyway, so I put their faces on there just to kind of be funny. All right, a little tongue in cheek. On the back side, you're going to write the mnemonic Lori C down the left, and we're going to have the 5 functions, like things that people who are in Congress do. All right, so get ready, flip it over. 5 functions of Congress, Lori C. So you're going to write LORIC down the left-hand side. I'd leave some space in between each, although they are pretty short, and I'll have an example or two that you don't have to write for each one. All right, so L, the most obvious purpose of a Congress member is lawmaking. All right, there you go. They make laws, right? They create policy. That's pretty standard operating procedure, right? Legislature equals lawmaking. So lawmaking, you don't have to write what's in gray, but members of Congress make laws that apply to the U.S. Okay, there you go. Members of Congress make laws that apply to U.S. You don't have to write that second part. Just write the dark, the bolded dark in black letters. Okay, good. Secondly, O, overseeing, and specifically the bureaucracy. Make sure you write all of that. Overseeing the bureaucracy. Overseeing the bureaucracy. And this might be the first time that we've talked about the word bureaucracy, and I'm not going to assume that you necessarily know what bureaucracy is. You probably heard of the term bureaucrat, and that's someone who works in a bureaucracy. But let me define it. You might want to make a little arrow above bureaucracy and write this. Bureaucracy is government departments and agencies that administer programs and enforce the law. Government department and agencies that administer programs and enforce the law. So it's just the government departments and agencies, okay? And their purpose is to make sure that programs are run, like Social Security or Medicare or Veteran Affairs, veteran, health, or enforce the law, like the IRS are going to enforce tax law, or the FBI is going to enforce federal law. So these are government departments and agencies. And it's Congress's job to oversee them, to make sure that they're not doing things that violate people's rights. Or just make sure that they're doing what Congress intended when the Congress passes a law. All right, so that's the bureaucracy. All right, cool. So L, lawmaking. O, overseeing the bureaucracy. Examples of the bureaucracy: Veteran Affairs, Department of Agriculture, Department of the Interior, which is in charge of our national parks, the Department of Justice, which is where the FBI is. So these are just examples of what they do. And the executive branch is made up of departments that enforce law, all right, or run programs. And you can see that it is the cabinet. It's the president's cabinet. And you have Secretary of State. That's the State Department that runs foreign affairs, Secretary of Health and Human Services, which run a lot of welfare programs, Treasury, which obviously prints money and takes care of budget matters, Housing and Urban Development for taking care of situations in cities and whatnot, Secretary of Defense, obviously the military. All these things are the bureaucracies that make up the presidential cabinet. And what happens is, and you don't write this, Congress makes sure that laws are enforced as intended. That's what it means to oversee the bureaucracy. Make sure laws are enforced as Congress wanted. And if the bureaucracy oversteps its bounds, then the bureaucracy can get in trouble, and it can be called in front of Congress. The members of the bureaucracy can be, and in some cases, they can even be charged. There was a really infamous scandal that happened in around 2015, 14, maybe it was a little earlier than that. And there were congressional hearings on the Veteran Affairs scandal. You can see from the headline, there were 18 veterans in Phoenix who were on a wait list for surgery, and they died while waiting. Like, the VA did such a terrible job of serving these veterans that they didn't get care before they died. They died before they got care. And this was a real big issue. And recently there was a law passed by a bipartisan law, which means both parties voted for it, that was signed into law by President Trump to give veterans options if they're on a wait list at a VA hospital. If they have to wait, they can go to a private hospital and the VA pays. So this is an example of, like, Congress is not happy that you are letting veterans die. That's not their intention. All right, so that's overseeing the bureaucracy. All right, R, representation. Representation. All right, and here's a picture of the 9th District Representative Morgan Griffith meeting with constituents. Remember, constituents are just people who live in your district. And representation means meeting with them, knowing what they believe, and being their representative, meaning their ideas and beliefs are representative in your votes. So let's just review again. Functions of Congress. So L, lawmaking, right? O, overseeing the bureaucracy. And then R, representation. All right, so think of those through your head. That's our practice. All right, cool. Let's keep going. Here's another representation. A Congresswoman Linda Sanchez from California. You see the D, and then it says CA. That means Democrat, California. And she's meeting with constituents in her office. So this is what you do. You go out to big crowds. You might go to a small office like this, and you meet and talk with people. So elected representatives, elected officials representing the will of the people, their constituents. And they'll probably most likely vote the way most of the people would in their district, because if they don't, they get voted out. And I was going to mention again. So Morgan Griffith represents the 9th District in Southwest Virginia. And he actually won election in a pretty big election in 2010, a midterm election. That means not a presidential election. And he beat a Democrat who had been there for over almost 30 years, Rick Boucher, who you can see down below. Unfortunately, the little screencastify thing is covering him up. But Rick Boucher represented the 9th District from 1983 to 2011, and his representation ended up getting him in trouble because he voted for a bill that would have hurt the coal industry. And in Southwest Virginia, there's still a lot of people that are connected to that. And so Morgan Griffith was able to beat him. And Morgan Griffith has won re-election overwhelmingly. You can see almost 70%. In 2016, he won re-election. He barely beat Rick Boucher. Why? Because Rick Boucher had incumbency advantages. He had been there for almost 30 years, and everybody knew Rick Boucher. And he was known for his constituent services and meeting with people and whatnot. But once he started to represent something outside what the district approved of, and in this case, it was something that would hurt the economics of the area, he was beaten. So this just shows you how re-elections and representation makes a difference. Investigation. And so Congress also does investigations, and specifically of the executive branch. And this is kind of similar to overseeing the bureaucracy. Overseeing just kind of means like you're watching over. And then investigation means that Congress can actually sit down and run like a criminal investigation of the executive branch. And the most famous example of this, of course, is Watergate. Watergate, when the Nixon campaign actually broke into some offices in order to dig up dirt on some Democrats. And so an investigation was launched. Congress actually, paid someone to do an investigation, and eventually that led to Nixon resigning. So investigate or have hearings of agencies or the president himself. Another example of this was the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, was investigated because they evidently had some knowledge about the lead in the water in Flint, Michigan, and you could see the pictures of the water there. Really horrible stuff that went on. And the House investigated the EPA's role in that water scandal in Flint. All right, and lastly is confirmation, and those include treaties, judges, and executive officers. I realize that executive officers got cut off. I apologize for that. So confirmation of treaties, confirmation of judges, and executive officers. And executive officers just means those people that head up the bureaucracy, the heads of the bureaucracy, the people that are part of the president's cabinet, which we'll talk more about in a later unit. So confirmation. And that, of course, is all the Senate, right? The Senate has to confirm treaties at 2/3, and judges and executive officers have to be confirmed with just a majority vote. So 50% plus 1. And so that's it. Those are what the functions of Congress are. Lori C. And, so just if I'm going to skip back here just so we can practice. So L, lawmaking. O, overseeing the bureaucracy. R, representation of your constituents in your district or state. Lori I, investigating the executive branch. And then lastly, C, confirmation of treaties, judges, and executive officers. So those are the functions of Congress. Know them.